For years, veterinary technology has promised efficiency, better care, and smarter workflows. Yet many practices still feel overwhelmed, adding platforms without clarity, chasing innovation without strategy. What if the real challenge isn't adapting more technology, but adapting it with intention? Welcome back to the Veterinary Business Podcast. I'm your host, Don Adeesha. And to help us navigate this shift, we're joined by Dr. Mike Mossop. Dr. Mike is the Chief Veterinary Officer at CoVet, where he focuses on integrating thoughtful technology into modern veterinary practice to enhance clinical care, operational performance, and team well-being. Now, with a background spanning emergency medicine, medical leadership, and entrepreneurship, he previously founded and led innovative care models that combine in-home services, virtual care, and membership-based access, redefining how practices delivered value to their clients. Today, we are going to be discussing how to build a future-ready veterinary practice and how to evaluate innovation without overwhelm, how to leverage technology to reduce burnout instead of adding on to complexity, and how to create systems that are both clinically excellent and financially sustainable. For our listeners here, we got a limited high-value opportunity from the Veterinary Business Institute. VBI is offering a complimentary customized marketing strategy session with Lila and her team. They'll invest 45 hours prior to your meeting to analyze your practice's online presence and develop a tailored plan to attract high-quality new patients, use AI to build trust, and increase consistent new patients calls month after month. So to book this session, do check us out at veterinarybusinessinstitute.com/MSM. That being said, Dr. Mossop, welcome to the Veterinary Business Institute's podcast.
Yeah, thanks very much, Don. I appreciate you guys having me on. Happy to chat.
So my first question to you. Veterinary medicine is seeing rapid growth in AI, automation, telehealth, and new care delivery models. From your experience, how can practice owners determine which technologies are truly transformational versus those that are simply trends?
Yeah, I think this is a really good question because I do know veterinarians on the front line, especially people managing practices, like they're shown different technology or different software, every week or every month. There's something new, and I think it can overwhelm clinics a little bit. So, trying to filter through that and figure out, okay, what is really gonna move the needle for me in my practice is, I think, question number one. Really, I think it comes down to a combination of two things and having those things in the right ratio. The number one thing is that it needs to solve a significant pain point. Like it needs to make a difference in something that is, whether it's taking a lot of your time or being particularly problematic in a workflow that you're doing over and over and over again. And then the other side, the second component, is that it needs to be easy to adopt. It needs to be easy to integrate with existing workflows. And I think if you have those two things in the right side, the right combination, I should say, so, outsized value and solving a large pain point and ease of adoption and ease of implementation, if you have that in combination, like you do with something like CoVet, I think that is really the stuff that is going to create something sticky that will work and stay with you for the long term. And in general, I guess a more kind of an easier way or a shortcut to figure this out is to get it in the hands of your vets and see what works for them. Like I think if a product has that right combination, the people using it will naturally gravitate to it. So in some ways with CoVet, we've been very fortunate. Certainly, we do speak to organizations and stuff like that, but a lot of our adoption has been kind of grassroots, right? It's been one veterinarian who heard from a friend and they started using it at their clinic and they really liked it and they told their colleagues, and then there's 3 or 4 of them and they bring it to the clinic manager and things like that. And I think you only get that type of organic growth with a product that again solves that pain point and is easy to use. So,
right. So let's talk about how important it is to have that stickiness of the product, right? In your own experience, where have you seen practices really falter here?
Yeah. I mean, I think the one that jumps to mind, and certainly I don't want to call out any specific products, but I know there is a lot of software out there built as kind of a client portal, right? So, a place where ideally the person can track all of their pet's metrics and, collate all of their records and make them available to the veterinarian. But I think one reason we haven't seen a clear winner in that category is that it often relies a lot on the client to do some of the data input and management. Like it's not automated, it's not easy to use. And the other thing is it's very fragmented, right? So maybe the client loves this one app, but the veterinarian's using a different one. So I think, for the people who are going to solve that problem, it needs to be a little bit more seamless, more automated, and you need to have kind of a larger buy-in from both the veterinary community and the client community, something that works really well for both of them. And certainly we are working on things like that. But yeah, that's the one that jumps to mind where I know practices have tried multiple different solutions and not necessarily stuck with one or the other.
That's really interesting because now you're talking about the client as well.
Yeah.
How important is that? And like with your own experience, how have you done better to serve the client? I'm talking about the pet owner, basically,
Yeah.
as well as the primary practice owner.
Yeah. I mean, I think in some ways this relates back a little bit to my experience prior to CoVet. You mentioned off the top that I ran kind of an in-home mobile service for about 5 years. I was also in emergency clinics and general practice, kind of more traditional roles. But the reason I started that business, it was called Treat Well Pet Care, was because I basically wanted to offer better client service. And, the way that we solved that at the time was basically just creating more time, right? The in-home model allowed you to have a consultation that was an hour or 90 minutes as opposed to 20 or 30 minutes. And so just by giving the veterinarian more time, they were better able to, really listen to their clients, to be patient, to, write more comprehensive educational materials for them specific to the case, that kind of thing. So what I guess I realized is that, while that worked in the in-home care scenario, like that doesn't work for most clinics. It's too busy. And I think the nice thing with AI products like CoVet is basically all of that client communication gets easier and faster, right? So as a veterinarian, like I am already recording the conversation with the client in order to produce my medical records, but by doing that, I really just have to click a button in order to produce a nice personalized visit summary for the client. And I think at CoVet, we certainly want to serve the profession. Like we always have the veterinary community front of mind, but to some way, the best way to help them is to help them serve their clients, right? If we can promote that kind of trust-based relationship, and if we can help veterinarians convey value to their clients. And I think that really just comes down to, again, communication. And we are aiming to make that communication as easy and efficient as possible. So basically to allow vets to do more with less time is kind of what it boils down to in that regard.
There we go. Now, Dr. Mossop, many clinics invest in tools but struggle with implementation and team adoption. What are some of the frameworks that leaders should use to evaluate, introduce, and measure the success of new technology without overwhelming the teams?
Yeah. So again, this comes back to something we said before, but I do understand that some teams are kind of overwhelmed with all the, whether it's, new email software, new website, new client portal, new communication software, all of that stuff. So I get that it's not necessarily an easy proposition. And again, I think if a product is good enough, there is this kind of organic adoption that starts to happen. Like vets will use it and gravitate to it and demand it. But to go a little further than that, I really do think, a product that allows you to kind of adopt it in stages is very helpful in this regard, right? So think of adopting a new practice management software. Like it's the opposite end of the spectrum where you need to get the entire practice aligned. You need to get every single product that's in your system moved over. Like there is a lot of work in terms of migration. And I think that's where things get really problematic. Whereas if you can kind of test something out, so deploy it with just one or two people or a particular group in the hospital and have them use it for a couple of months and learn the ins and outs. And in a lot of clinics, like people do have kind of champions, just an individual who happens to be particularly keen on technology and wants to try out something new, or they just, they're particularly struggling with their records or something like that. And so, finding those champions, finding that pilot group, I think is kind of the best thing. And then if there's success there and you want to move it to something larger within the clinic, like they act as teachers or educators within the practice. So I think that's one thing that is important. Certainly you want to have a product where you feel supported, right? So like if you're using software and you're seeing an error or something like that, you don't know how to solve it, it can very quickly turn into a roadblock. So I think having a robust support department is important. And, with CoVet, we do have that. Our entire support department is staffed by former veterinary technicians and practice managers. So like they're the people who can empathize with what's going on in the clinic day to day. Like they know exactly how chaotic things can be when your software breaks down. And they speak the language, right? So they can understand what the vet is saying. And, I think we're the only AI provider in the veterinary space that actually has a phone number you can call, right? So you can call in, you can talk to a human. We also have, chat, email, all of that stuff. But I think there's nothing that quite replaces that human connection. And I mean, that's something we're very proud of and we've always prioritized. So that's important. And then, again, with bigger groups, you can go on to, organized, whether it's webinars, training sessions, demonstrations as a group or a whole. But I think, sometimes what a user needs in like their first 2 weeks on the platform might be a little different from what they need at month 2 or month 3, right? Like as they start to use it, especially a tool that's as powerful as CoVet, there's more and more to discover and kind of having different touch points along this kind of onboarding road, I think is another thing that has worked well for a lot of practices. So.
Wonderful. And I was just curious, especially with CoVet, how does the integration to the PMS really work?
Yeah, so we integrate with a number of different practice management softwares. And so, to be honest, the answer is a little different depending on which software you work with. So for the ones where we have kind of a true integration, basically CoVet will read the appointment book in the practice management software. Your appointments will magically appear every morning. You do your work in CoVet, so basically recording, whether it's consultations or summarizing PDF files or whatever it is you need to turn into a medical document. And then there's basically a one-click button that sends it back to the practice management software and ensures that all of the material ends up in the right place. So CoVet's kind of a writing tool or a drafting tool, but the integration makes it really seamless in that it's basically one click to bring it in, one click to export it out. We do have other solutions for practice management softwares that don't yet have an integration. It's a very easy copy and paste. You basically put two windows next to each other. We have some other solutions, a Google Chrome extension where we can live next to a web-based practice management software and make that really easy. So that's kind of how we do that.
It's almost seamless in any case scenario.
That is the goal. So, and I'd say too, we do get this question. We are intentionally not building a practice management software. Like the practice management software obviously is a very important piece of every practice, right? It's kind of the heart in a lot of ways. And we don't aim to replace that. I mean, it is customized to the practice. The difference, CoVet, it really is more of a personal assistant. So it is customized to the veterinarian and, helps them write in their voice and knows their preferences and things like that. And I guess, the nice thing is if you leave the practice and you go to a different practice, or if you work at multiple practices, like CoVet stays with you every step of the way. And I think what the trend we're seeing is that CoVet is kind of turning into like the interface with the most, the heaviest touch point, right? It's the screen that is open for the veterinarian the most in their day-to-day workflow. And so that's their primary interaction point. And then moving it into the practice management software for kind of permanent storage becomes a very easy proposition with, especially those integrations. So.
Okay. Now, a different type of question. With your background in emergency medicine and medical leadership, how can technology be leveraged to reduce burnout and improve operational efficiency rather than add on that layer of complexity?
Yeah. So I think it can help in a lot of ways. And I mean, CoVet and AI, I think, are a huge force for positive change in the industry. I mean, there's a lot of problems with the industry, to be honest. Like, we're not going to solve all of them, but I think we can make a really significant dent. And I guess it comes down to a couple of things. Like, number one is time savings, right? It's just in the mind of a lot of vets, if you ask anybody out there, there's just not enough hours in the day, especially when you get the random emergency visit that just slotted in between two appointments where no time really exists in the schedule, right? And so I think, allowing a vet to be faster, it really does turn into the difference between staying late to write your records for 2 hours once the clinic closes, or, once you get home, versus kind of, finishing your shift, wiping your hands and leaving and being done with it, and being able to, be present with your family or do other things that make a difference to you as a human being. So the time savings is huge. The other component of it that I think is harder to measure, but possibly even more important, is kind of the mental load that using CoVet takes off of a veterinarian. Like, being a vet is hard, right? You're jumping from appointment to appointment. They're emotional, they're complicated. There's financial things on top of that, and if you haven't finished the records for one visit, you're still thinking about that as you're doing the second and third and fourth. And so, I think a vet's cognitive load is heavily burdened in practice because they're doing so many things at once. And never mind the time savings, CoVet just takes some of that off their plate, right? They don't have to remember, was it the left ear or the right ear, if they need to. And this comes back to the client part, like, okay, I need to write my medical record, but I also need to communicate this to the owner, or I need to make a phone call, and now I need to document that. Like, it helps in a lot of ways. And I think my sincere hope is that, kind of reducing that stress level is something that will keep veterinarians in practice longer, right? Like, I know there's a lot of people leaving the profession or switching to alternative careers and stuff like that because they do get burnt out, they get exhausted, right? And, we've had vets tell us that they've, decided to delay retirement after starting to use CoVet, right? They were going to quit, and basically they're like, hey, it's gotten so much easier that I'm going to keep going for a couple of years. We've had people tell us that it's made their marriage better because they're getting home for dinner. Like, it has a lot of very wide-reaching implications for kind of long-term employment, sustainability, that kind of stuff. So yeah.
That's amazing. I just want to play a bit of the devil's advocate here and ask a very similar story which happens with AI adoption across the board, which is work seems to get easier. As you mentioned, cognitive load does reduce, but overall that can lead to more, new analysis, new reports, new feedback, on how to do things better. And how would you go about really balancing that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a fair question, I think. In a lot of ways, I think that kind of reporting and analysis will fall on kind of leadership teams at clinics. And I guess, leadership team in quotations for a large group that could be, a totally separate board or something like that. Whereas for an individual practice, it might be the main veterinarian who's also seeing appointments. But I hope and I think that, one thing AI and CoVet are really good at doing is kind of recognizing patterns and wording things in a very succinct way, right? So, I mean, you are right that it gives you more data to crunch through and potentially more information to analyze. But my hope is that the tools will actually allow you to do that in an efficient way. And hopefully, in terms of additional reporting, which are things we're working on, right? We do have like an analytics dashboard that will pull out a bunch of numbers from all of the consultations you or your practice has done. But, I think the onus is on us a little bit to make sure we're highlighting things that are usable, right? Not just creating noise and creating extra data and streams, but presenting it in a way where these are usable numbers and it doesn't cause extra strain. So
Thank you very much for that, Dr. Mossop. Really appreciate that answer. Now, you previously pioneered a hybrid membership-based care model combining in-home and virtual services. What business and leadership lessons can traditional veterinary practices learn from alternative care models to improve accessibility, client loyalty, and perhaps even financial stability?
Yeah, I mean, we touched on this earlier. I think, at least in my mind, and keep in mind, I have done some emergency medicine, but my heart is really in like general practice and this kind of relationship-centered type of care. And I think emergency and specialty are a little different here, but a lot of similarities exist. And I really think it all comes back to a veterinarian being able to convey value to their client, like regardless of the cost of the visit and the medical outcome. You want the client to leave the room feeling good, right? And even in the worst case scenario, like an appointment that leads to euthanasia of a pet or something like that, like obviously the client will be sad, but you want them to have a positive memory, like, hey, that veterinarian did their best to help me through a tough time and they did a good job of it. And I think, if we can convey value, it does a couple of things. Number one, it will help with compliance. So just people following your instructions and using the proper medication and doing regular blood testing and things like that. You need to be able to present it in a way that has the medically important information, but also a way that speaks to the individual and their kind of needs and wants in the moment. Like you need to kind of hear what they're asking for and not just giving them the medical gold standard type of thing. But yeah, I think it will help with compliance and helps with return business. And I think, any clinic that has, like that client loyalty and high compliance, people who will, follow their veterinarian's advice, like those are the successful clinics. That's what everybody wants to be. And it does lead to financial sustainability, in terms of, specific alternative models and stuff like that. I mean, there's a whole lot going on out there. It's really cool to see certain clinics, whether it's some of the membership wellness plan stuff, whether it's, in-home versus in clinic, like there's a lot of telemedicine as well. People are getting creative. I don't think there is one magic solution. Like there's actually a lot of really interesting possibilities there, but it's cool to see how that's evolving and what people are building out there. But I think regardless of the model and the structure, like it really is about conveying value to the client and gaining that client trust, that client loyalty, and that leads to a healthy practice.
Tell me about how do you go about identifying what the client needs at that moment, right? Because how are we going to speak their language? What are some of the telltale signs, perhaps, of how you should communicate?
Yeah, and I mean that's a big question. I think it's an important question. It really, I mean, to me, that comes down to communication skill more than medical skill. I mean, don't get me wrong, obviously the medical skill is very important, but you could be the best clinician in the world, and if you don't listen to your client and they're not listening to you, it doesn't matter because nothing's going to happen, right? So, I can appreciate that veterinarians do get some, but maybe not a whole lot of communication training, and it is a tricky skill. The good news is it is a learnable skill. Like I think it's something that people can work on and improve. CoVet is actually working on some features that will help people with this. And that's a whole other conversation. But, I think part of it comes down to simply taking a little bit of time to listen to the client. And again, I'm hoping that CoVet frees up more time and you can spend those extra 2 minutes listening and then, not just hearing what they say, but really listening and trying to get the underlying tone. Like if sometimes it comes down to nonverbal communication or paraverbal communication, and you can tell when the issue of price comes up, like somebody gets a little fidgety or non-committal. Kind of taking a step back and just say like, hey, I sense that this is a tricky topic and a tricky decision. And I get it, right? Like this is not easy. It's a lot of money. And I think, just empathizing with them, providing options and being very clear and direct in a kind way is kind of what has served me well. And again, I'm not a communication expert per se, but again, it's worked well for me. And I do think those are things that most people can do if they're not doing already. So.
Okay. Acknowledging them where they're at. Why do, we get this often in our panels as well, like, it feels salesy sometimes. How can we overcome that personal perspective?
Yeah. And I think the trick is being able to verbalize the reason for the things you are recommending at a level that the client understands in a way that resonates with them, right? So, for instance, like, doing regular blood work with a senior pet or something like that, I think is a good example. And I think is something that can seem salesy. So, because it could be a few $100s, like the pet is, let's say they just turned 7 and they have no medical issues, like they're apparently normal, right? And so I think depending on how you put that across, it could look like, hey, you're trying to upsell me. But I think, being able to verbalize that this is going to help us detect diseases earlier and intervene earlier. In the long run, it will, potentially extend your pet's life. And, I guess also one thing is not being pushy, right? Like if you can clearly communicate that and somebody understandably says, no, I don't want to do that, I think that's a legitimate answer. And I think you need to kind of respect those bounds and say, okay, that's great. Let's move on. And I think maybe we can circle back to that, in 6 months or next year. Certainly there's payment options and all that stuff, but I think there is a point where you need to kind of, again, listen to the client and work with them and their priorities. But I do think, especially when you have these longer term trust-based relationships, some of this messaging, like it's not about having the whole conversation in 2 minutes in one visit. Like it's about having that conversation at multiple touch points along the way, right? So, maybe when the pet's 7, they don't do that blood work, but when they're 8 or 9, they can. And I think, again, if this is one extended conversation and even better, like, I think clinics that can send out information in advance of a visit. So like, hey, your pet has just turned 7. We generally recommend, wellness blood testing for all of these reasons. That way, when they get into the room and the veterinarian mentions this, it's not unexpected, right? It's not this $300 cost that has come out of nowhere. Like, both parties are already aware of it, and it does make that conversation easier for the veterinarian. So I think that, that communication for clinics that are operating really efficiently, it extends beyond that one conversation and becomes, a longer conversation over time and over multiple touch points. Because, frankly, with a lot of people, even with veterinarians and myself, like sometimes you need to hear something more than once for it to really sink in. But that kind of consistent, kind, respectful communication, I think in the end does win out. So.
Amazing. Now, through your work with practices at CoVet, what common characteristics do you see in clinics that successfully modernize? And can you share an example of how thoughtful technology integration improved clinical outcomes, workflow efficiency, or financial performance?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple things that jump to mind. I'd have to look up. I don't have the name of the clinic off the top of my tongue, but there was one clinic. It is an emergency clinic, and I think again there are some differences between emergency and general practice. The big one being that you don't have a set appointment book in emergency, right? It's just visit after visit after visit. And the study that they did is basically measuring their vets' productivity before and after the implementation of CoVet. So I think it was about 6 months later. And they did find that their productivity went up by about 10%. Like each vet was seeing an extra one, it was 1.2 or 1.3 cases per shift. And, that at scale, that turns into significant numbers, right? And, I think, again, when you can go through cases faster because you have these extra tools, it allows you to do more. Again, if you're in general practice and you have a set schedule, maybe you're not filling it with extra visits. Maybe you're taking that as time for yourself to breathe or eat lunch or go home on time, that kind of thing. But that's kind of one case, that jumps to mind. You mentioned other interesting use cases like, a lot of practices are doing this, but I do think of certain specialty practices in particular. They're not just using CoVet to record consultations and write medical notes, but they're actually using it to like look through patient histories, right? They get just reams and reams of documentation, and they need to get through all of this in a very fast and efficient way. And so one of the tools that CoVet offers is you can upload, patient history files and have a summary presented to you in 30 seconds, which gives you all those core details. You can actually talk to CoVet and ask it more detailed and nuanced questions. You can basically send the AI back to those records to pull out additional details. So a lot of clinics have adopted that. Emergency clinics are kind of using it, and other clinics as well, but they're using it in a team-based environment, right? So like multiple people sharing records and passing cases back and forth when one vet rounds a case to another, or when a triage nurse or technician will start a case, add material, create a preliminary report, and then pass it off to the veterinarian that's going to be picking it up. So like we've built the platform in a very flexible way, and we're adding more and more tools with every passing week, and it's really cool to see how different practices are embracing them. Like it's I don't want to say no two clinics are alike, but like different people are using it in different ways, and it's really cool to see that. So
Absolutely. Now, Dr. Mossop, as we wrap up, I would love to have one key takeaway for our audience members, the golden nuggets of the conversation.
yeah, I think the biggest thing that I would recommend people do is to just try it out. Like obviously I'm biased. I think CoVet is your best solution, but no matter what solution you use, like some of this stuff you can listen to as many podcasts and watch as many help center videos as you want, but it's not quite the same as actually having the tools in your hand and being able to use them in real cases and see how they work and start to tinker and customize them. Because I do think like one thing that has become apparent to us, like veterinarians are not surprisingly very picky about their medical records and their other communication, right? Like they want it to be accurate, and they want it to match the formatting and the style that they want, and rightfully so, right? I get that these documents are extremely important, and I think a tool that gets a vet to kind of 80% or 85% just isn't good enough. Basically, what we see happen is that somebody starts using it, they'll try it out for a couple of weeks, but they find that bridging that extra 15, 20% gap is just too onerous, right? They're going back, they're having to edit and change. And it's a pain in the butt. Like it kind of relates back to this first point, is it needs to work and be easy to adopt, but they kind of run into some friction there. And so for success, you really do, like, you need the output to get to where they want to be, to like 95 plus 100%, right? Like it needs to require very little manipulation after creation for a vet to stick with it long term. And so in that sense, like customization is important. I think CoVet works very well out of the box. And that's why I'm saying, I'd encourage people to try it. But, most vets do personalize it to some extent. Again, we have a ton of options. Our support team is there to help you if you run into trouble or you have questions. But I think, the only way to really try it and do that little bit of tweaking is to start using it, right? So that's kind of my thing, is just try it out, see how it goes. We have a free trial. It's easy to get started. So.
Do you, how do we get that free trial?
Yeah, so good question. Just go to our homepage, co.vet, co.vet. Very easy. There's a little button up in the right corner, and I think probably a few other places. But no credit card or anything like that required. You can basically sign up and start using the app that day. You can sign up 5 minutes before your visit and get going. And I find it usually takes people like a day, maybe 2 days to kind of get used to the basics and learn the workflow. So again, it's a very rapid adoption curve, and I'm optimistic if your listeners out there give it a try, that they'll enjoy it. So.
Awesome. So Dr. Mossop, thank you so much for the insightful conversation today. As we wrap up today's conversation, I hope this episode gave you clarity around what intentional innovation really looks like inside a veterinary practice. So, technology doesn't transform a clinic on its own, strategy does, leadership does, thoughtful implementation does. So, if Dr. Mossop's perspective resonated with you, we encourage you to explore his work through CoVet. We will also tag this LinkedIn in the show notes so you can connect with him directly and continue the conversation. Also, I do need to remind you that you can still book a complimentary marketing strategy meeting with Lila, where you will receive a personalized review of your clinic's online presence and a 6-month growth roadmap tailored just for your goals. So visit www.veterinarybusinessinstitute.com/MSM to schedule your free session. If you found value in today's episode, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, share this with a fellow practice owner or veterinary leader who's committed to building a stronger, future-ready practice. Until next time, keep on leading.